Gentlemen, welcome to this interesting conversation. I say interesting because I know it's going to be interesting.
Thank you, Viswa.
All right. Now, Leong Mun Wai, Secretary General of the PSP, and Sani Ismail, one of the fresh faces, candidate in West Coast-Jurong West GRC. It's now a mouthful.
Yeah,
it used to be
mouthful,
just
yeah.
West Coast GRC. Now it's West Coast-Jurong West GRC.
And they've introduced that this round.
This round.
Yeah, many of the GRCs have become...
Many of the, with an add-on.
Yes.
And the reason why it's called West Coast-Jurong West is because Jurong West is was a part of Jurong GRC.
Yes.
Right? And with 41,000 people, we've now come into West Coast.
Yes.
Right? And it's widely known that they are essentially pro-PAP because many of them voted in support of PAP when they were in Jurong, right?
Yes.
So how do you find that? How do you feel about that? That you're going to have now 41,000 people who were different from 2020. You know, in 2020, just for our viewers to understand, in 2020, you together with Dr Tan Cheng Bock and your colleagues, right? You all were part of West Coast GRC.
Yes.
And it was a very close fight.
Yes.
I think the difference between the winner, the PAP, and you was 3.38%. 3.38%. And in actual votes, you're talking about 4,662 votes out of a total vote count of 144. Today, the constituency, the GRC is 144,000. It's pretty big constituency.
Today is 158,000 actually.
158?
Yeah. Previously it was 144.
144.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was an increase in the number of voters.
Total, because of Jurong West.
Yes, because
right. So how do you feel about this?
I think that has been quite widely spoken by our party already.
Yeah.
I think Hazel has spoken on it various times. So as a result, I didn't talk much about it. But since you asked about it, then...
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell. In the past, the West Coast-Jurong GRC has got 5 wards. Nanyang, Boon Lay, West Coast, Ayer Rajah, and Telok Blangah, which is very much to the east. Right. This round, they took out Telok Blangah and then put in Taman Jurong and a little bit of what we call Jurong Spring. Okay, so total 41,000 new voters into the GRC.
Right.
After having taken out about 28,000.
Telok Blangah.
Yeah. And while we have been actually urging the government to release the voting results of each of these wards, but that is not officially released. It is only just a GRC result, like 48.3% for us and 51.7% for the PAP the last round.
Yes.
But actually, we who have participated in the election, we know how the individual wards has performed. In fact, we know further into each of the ward has got about 10 precincts of polling district. We know the results of each of the polling districts. So if the government were to publish those results, then we will be able to know the proof.
But based on your own reading, you said how each precinct. How did Telok Blangah fare?
Yes. So last round, Telok Blangah fared actually quite well. It was
in your favor?
In our favor. Close to 50%, but not yet. Didn't cross the 50%. So that was taken out. And they put in Taman Jurong, which was which was a ward that highly favored the
ruling party.
Yeah, the ruling party. Because the last round, President Taman was there as the candidate.
Yeah. And consistently, GE after GE, Jurong GRC has always been the highest winner,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The strongest winner.
Yeah, a large part of that is because of President Taman.
Of course.
Yeah. So
the other thing is that's interesting is both in 2020 and now, you guys, PSP has put the three key leaders in. I don't recall any other place doing that. I mean, you have the founder, founding chairman, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock. You have yourself as the Secretary General of the party, party chief, and you've got Hazel, who before you was the party chief.
yes.
Now, three of you are in there. If you win, it's great. If you lose, all three of you are probably not going to be in the parliament chamber.
Yes. Yes.
Now, it's not a risk that many political parties are willing to take.
Yes.
And 2 elections consecutively.
Yes.
Why did you all decide to take this level of risk?
As I have explained the other day when we introduced ourselves at Taman Jurong, we say that after thinking through the whole strategy, we think that this would be the best way for us to thank the former West Coast GRC residents. Well, the West Coast residents are still there, but there's no more West Coast GRC now.
Yeah.
But those residents, Telok Blangah is out, but the 4 wards remain. And the residents in those 4 wards, in total, still roughly 48.3% of them had actually voted for us. So we thought it would be rather cowardly to say that because they put in a nominally strong ward, and it seems a very difficult battle to fight.
I mean, Minister Desmond Lee is quite a favoured individual.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. But Minister Desmond Lee had been there before.
Yes.
We still have 48.3%.
Yeah.
And now former Minister Iswaran is no longer there.
Yeah.
So in terms of the lineup, you say that we may have some advantage, right? Some advantage. So, but they put in Taman Jurong. So nominally, the battle seems to be much tougher. But as I said just now, we don't want to be seen that we sort of back out because of that. Because we have to respond to the strong support that the voters of West Coast have given to us the last time. And it is because of them that Hazel and I was in Parliament.
Yes.
And it's because of them Hazel and I were able to make use of the opportunity to prove ourselves in Parliament.
That's true.
And that has brought some good things.
And commitment.
PSP.
Commitment to people.
Commitment to people.
Now, that part, this commitment to people factor seems to be becoming a major issue.
Yes.
Given what happened in Marine Parade. Right?
Oh, yes.
Yes, I mean, people of Marine Parade, from what I've understood, are very, very deeply, very upset.
Yes.
I think they're upset with Workers' Party for pulling out. Harpreet Singh was seen to be active in Marine Parade.
Yes.
He's pulled out to go to Punggol. Likewise, Tan Si Leng, who was seen very much as the leader of the PAP team,
in
Marine Parade, also last minute pulled out and has come to Choa Chu Kang, which is where your team is competing.
Yes.
They've come to Choa Chu Kang. But more significantly, also, the DPM, Gan Kim Yong, who was a stalwart, very much of a stalwart in Choa Chu Kang GRC, in the 11th hour, pulled out and has gone to Punggol. So it's like I mean, as an observer, I was putting myself in the shoes of the residents of these places. How they must feel. They're merely pawns in a larger game that political parties are playing.
And this is not the first time they have pull a DPM from one ward to another ward, right?
You're talking about Heng Swee Keat in East Coast.
Exactly.
No, I mean, without really pointing fingers at any particular political party, I just feel that this sort of last-minute horse trading and moving doesn't augur well for people's...
I'm not sure whether you call that horse trading or not.
No, it's some form of trading. I know what it is.
Maneuvering.
Trading.
Maneuvering basically in what we think is that they are just trying to put the minister in a place to stop qualified opposition candidates from coming into
But
parliament.
whatever it is, at the end of the day, I think, an election is supposed to respect
the wishes
of the citizens and the voters.
Yes.
I'm not seeing that in some of these things, you know. So to hear you say why you are staying, all three of you, party leaders are staying.
We are committed.
You know, you're committed. And without saying that I'm in support of PSP or anything, I'm just very happy to hear that because it's a breath of fresh air.
Yes.
Right. So, Sani, how do you feel? First time coming in and being part of a team where all the three leaders of your party are there. How do you feel?
I mean, very excited, of course, and it's a lot of pressure as well, you know, having the top leadership within the team. But I take that as an opportunity for me to learn from the top leadership. I'm very privileged with Mun Wai, Hazel, and Dr. Tan in terms of the different skills. As you know, this is my maiden election, so got lots to learn. And you know, I'm very fortunate to be in the team to learn from the leadership.
And I must say that, you know, I have great respect for anyone who stands for election, whether you're on the PAP ticket or... Because if you win, it means the next 5 years you've got no life. No, so I've often wondered why people do this. Why do people do this?
Very easy for country, for people.
For country, yeah. But those are words, you know. But you expect it to.
It's not just words.
I know, but what I'm saying is it'll be just words if you don't follow through and follow up with action. You know.
Well,
so,
Dr. Tan Cheng Bock has followed through.
Yeah, he's followed through
for half a century.
Yeah. And so, Sani, let me ask you this: why did you go to England to do your undergraduate law degree? Okay. Why not Singapore?
Right. The decision for that was it came during the time when I started my O levels. That was a very difficult year for me because few months prior to the O-level examinations, my father died. And so, but before he passed on, we were discussing, and I did express my interest to read law. I mean, I spoke with him extensively, was whether to go into commercial flying or law. And then we
commercial flying?
Yes. And so then when he died, so I had to, you know, he left behind my mom, who was a housemaker for 18 years, ever since she got married. And then my younger sister was 3 years younger than me. So I had to step forward and play the leadership role within the family to support my mom in terms of not so much financial support, but in terms of the moral support. And because suddenly for her, it's just, there's a void, you know. And unfortunately for me, I didn't do very well in my O-level exams for that year. And so I had the option of redoing the exams again. But the thing with me is that I think ahead by a long way, and I know where I want to get to. And I never take no for an answer. So I won't like allow some changes in the plans to kind of hinder or for me to make a detour. So I will just find alternatives just to keep moving, keep going.
And stay on track.
Yeah. If I were to apply to do A-levels in Singapore, I would need to redo my O-levels. That would mean one extra year. So I had a discussion with the family, and I was the one who said, look, this is what I want to do. I'll go and serve national service, and then I'm going to the UK, pursue my studies. And so, hence, so I went there, did my foundation year, and then got admitted into law school.
Now, the point I'm trying to make is this. You went to study abroad because you had no choice. I'm putting it bluntly.
Yeah.
Because you didn't do well enough to get into a local university. You went there and you didn't go to one of the top universities like Oxford, Cambridge, and so on. And the point I'm trying to make is Singaporeans have been conditioned to be quite elitist and brand conscious. Yeah. If you went to the UK and you got your degree from Oxford or Cambridge or King's, it would have been a different story. They would suddenly view you differently. Like Mun Wai, you went on overseas merit scholarship to Japan. Suddenly you're viewed as you're called a scholar, which is the wrong term actually.
Yeah.
Right? But in a brand conscious society, we are not big on second chances. Maybe we're changing a little bit now, but we're not really known for second chances. What do you think are your chances of winning?
Well, I think, to go back to the point about the institution where I graduated from or where I studied, I think the point is that people, I believe, will also focus on what you make out of it. You could be, like you said, getting a qualification, a degree from Oxbridge, but if you don't put that into good use in terms of how you apply what you have been qualified in, what you've studied, into the general good. And I think that's where I would like to think how people will be viewing myself in that instance. So,
do you think so?
Well, I hope so. Look, when I was 12 years old, the two critical exams in Singapore, PSLE and O-levels, I had bad fortune on both. O-levels was when my father passed away a few months before that. PSLE was like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks before the PSLE exams, I was down with chicken pox. And I had a nasty one. So, I was like, couldn't go to school and everything else, couldn't do the revisions and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, when did the PSLE, and I was like 3 points short from being into the express stream. And of course, people would say, to my parents, why didn't you appeal? Or you could appeal, or so on, so whatsoever. And so you are right about that particular kind of stigma attitude, because people will look at me and say, I until today, I can still vividly recall, like some of my parents' friends they looked at me and they said, oh, he's normal. Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. Oh, he's not express. Oh, you look like an express kid, but you're not. And I was like, what's wrong with that? So, but I am.
But you carry that stigma with you.
Yes,
till today, in this society you do, and it's really strange, because about 10, 15 years ago, I was invited to be on the board of a stat board in Singapore. And after some talking, I said, okay, I'm happy to consider it. And then I was asked to submit my PSLE
O-level
transcript. PSLE O-level transcript. Can you imagine? And this is not too long ago. So I'm saying the reality,
in Singapore,
the reality, we have to look at the reality is people are brand conscious. When it comes to educational qualifications, when it comes to professional qualifications,
actually,
so on.
I think you may be a bit overstating it, because I think in our Singapore society, only the government and the establishment is so brand conscious.
You don't think the people are?
I don't think the people are. Yeah.
Why do you say that?
The people are a lot less than the kind of brand consciousness that the government is trying to uphold. Yeah, because the government keep emphasizing the scholars. Yeah. Keep emphasizing that they are the only one with all the talents in Singapore.
Right.
But that's not the case. Right?
It is changing.
It is changing. Actually, I think a lot of Singaporeans, after a few generations, like our generation, we wouldn't think that is necessary, because because we through our own lived experience, we already know that it is not just about what was your A-level results or even your university results.
Yeah.
It is about, like what Sani has said, how you make use of the opportunities and the things that you have learned on the way and make best use of it.
That's So actually, it'll be interesting to ask this, right? I've been wondering about this. Most people are going in to Parliament. If you get elected, you're going in as a backbencher. Most people, I would say 85% backbenchers. The rest would be political office holders, right? Now, when it comes to being a political office holder, a minister, parliamentary secretary, and so on, you would be expected to have a certain amount of domain knowledge, practical knowledge, perhaps. But if you're going in as a backbencher, what do you think are the critical qualifications or abilities or qualities you should have?
I think
if you're a backbencher.
So as a backbencher, I think for that matter, it's in terms of connection with the community, with the constituents whom you are representing. And I think that's where the path I underwent would provide to the constituents the appreciation that I could understand what people go through, what people are going through, empathy. Yeah. Whereby it's not only being in their shoes, but to a certain extent walked some miles in it. And that's what I hope.
That torn shoes.
Yes, yes. And that's what I hope that the constituents or voters would see in me, not just as someone who has graduated from this university or that university or whatsoever, but the lessons I've learned in life, what I am bringing to the table, the community involvement I have been in since my return to Singapore 12 years ago, and the reasons why I've taken this whole big step in terms of putting myself forward for election.
In fact, I have our party has always seen the experience of Sani in a very positive light. First of all, when I interviewed him, I straight away I got a chemistry with him already, because I said, "Oh, you spent 20 years overseas. I spent 20 years overseas too. I spent 20 years in the East. You spent 20 years in the West. Maybe there's something we can bring together.
And complement
and bring to Singapore." But even though we were educated very differently, one in the East and one in the West. Of course, I have a master's from the London Business School as well, but predominantly. But mainly for my first degree, I was educated in Japan. So a lot more Oriental influence. But once you're international, you have the international experience. You are slightly different from the Singaporeans in the sense that we have very different perspective. And I think when we discuss things in a party or any other things, I found Sani a lot more open-minded, open-minded in listening to your opinions. And that's very important, right? I'm sure you know that we Singaporeans are actually we don't like too much discussion, right? Yeah. So I think Sani brings with him, that very Western style of respecting other people's opinions.
I'm not even sure whether it's Western or Asian. I think it's human. The human style. And I'm seeing that. I would agree with you. The first time I'm meeting you, I see in you a certain level of humility to acknowledge that you don't have answers to many questions. Simple acknowledgement of that. There's nothing wrong with that. So I see that coming through. So the point I'm making is, people expect something different from an MP compared to if you are a minister. There is a difference, And most people who go into parliament are going to be backbenchers. Right? Now, my next question is this. The two representatives from PSP were NCMP. You didn't have a constituency. But we have seen the experience of Workers' Party.
Mm.
They are actual elected MPs,
Yes.
right? How much of leeway do they have in effecting policies, right? They can't even book a badminton court or a multi-purpose hall, hold an event. You don't get invited to events, not even as guest of honor. You don't get invited, in your own constituency. So if you do get elected, it's a very practical question. How much of change can you effect? If all the doors are locked, all the windows are locked.
Well, all these years, I think, despite all these hurdles, I think WP has done very well with the residents already. There are ways we can do it. But of course, we have said many times in Parliament, we hope that the government is more open, is fairer about this thing, because this is in the interest of Singaporeans.
Yeah.
That when you have a grassroots organization like People's Association with all the facilities, the MPs in its interaction, in its work with the residents, will be the best to know what kind of facilities and what kind of activities would be best for the residents. So, why not let the opposition MPs be part and parcel of this grassroots organization?
That's true.
And I would say, if I may,
Please.
I think this is a long haul. We have to go through it for a long haul process. The constituents will, in time, realize more and more of it. Obviously, when it was just alternate Hougang, probably not so apparent. But I think with Sengkang GRC and the fact the elected members of the Sengkang GRC couldn't use the PA facilities, they are not called grassroots advisors, they were not invited or they were not there giving out the EduSave bursary awards to the recipients. So I think in the past few years, this has come to the surface a lot more than it did. And so, which is a positive step. And I think the government, with scholars and whatnot, I think they should take that into account and perhaps try to see how this could be addressed.
And what you're saying is that this can't continue.
This can't continue.
And it will not be to the advantage of the ruling party either.
Certainly not.
Yeah,
continues.
Singaporeans are getting more and more aware of what is going on. That I think they generally think that this is not the best arrangement. But of course, because whatever arrangement that the government puts up, over time, people can spin another story. Right? Right now, a new story that's emerging is that, if you vote an opposition MP in, you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You buy one, get two. You vote an opposition MP in, but you get the PAP defeated MP to serve you as well.
And, we could talk about that for some time. But let me maybe switch gears a bit and ask you this question to both of you, right? But maybe, Sani, you could answer this first. 17.5% of your constituents, they're Malay. It is very obvious, to me at least, that in the recent past, there's been quite a bit of disillusionment among the Malay community, especially pertaining to issues like Gaza. The two young ladies who went to ask. They didn't ask about Gaza specifically, but you hear this being talked about. How would you reach out to that constituency? You're Malay speaking. How would you reach out to that constituency? It's a very important constituency.
I think
we'll be focusing on Singaporean.
Yes.
Singapore. Yeah.
So I think we will put the PSP itself is rather race blind. So the policies that we put forward are generally for all Singaporeans. But in terms of the specific racial group that you've mentioned, Malays, for example, I think the common denominator here will be the religious background. I'm an Indian Muslim. So and Malays are quite synonymously Muslims, and so in terms of the those issues like Gaza and whatnot, my view is that I think they just wanted to see some representation or to have an avenue where there are people who are representatives of different of the Singapore government, perhaps to come up with statements or make some explanations, especially when sometimes you have this little bubbles that's going around in that particular region.
So, specifically, let's talk about the statement made by Kelvin Cheng. Which any sensible person would say it's ridiculous. How could anyone be allowed to make a statement like that? So, Mun Wai, if you are elected, you're elected into the West Coast GRC, but this is still something that would affect you, right?
Yeah.
Something that's said outside the national level.
Yeah.
How would you respond to that if you're elected, if you're in Parliament?
Well, I think we will definitely question the government in Parliament about their reaction, their response to what Mr. Kelvin Cheng has said. Why the response was so slow, why the response, and so far the response from the government, is that sufficient? Especially in view of some of the other treatments they've given to other people who had infringed, the law as well. So we will be pursuing those. But in terms of the Gaza issue, I think we have stated our position in Parliament already. Of course, in terms of our relationship with foreign countries, we are totally behind the government. We are one united people. Yeah. We don't want to show that we quarrel. Yeah. But we hope, because we also have to be mindful that our society is a multiracial society. So certain communities in our society will be more concerned about certain issues than others. And we would urge the government to continue to be sensitive to that. And maybe in terms of even having the same foreign policy objective, maybe they could apply it a bit differently.
Right.
They could make certain statements, that would basically make the sentiments among a certain community less agitated. Yeah, I think we should do that. Yeah.
So, if I hear you correctly, it's about looking at that issue, even though it's a minority issue, as part of a larger national interest issue.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it cannot contradict national societal interests.
Correct.
Individual viewpoints should not contradict.
Yes.
But there will be times when smaller groups have their specific issue. It may not be necessarily in sync with the national perspective. And as society moves on, you will see more and more niche interests.
But I do believe that even when certain community issues, even religious issues, or even in the future, a lot of the subcultures will come into our society, I think the important thing is that to respect all these, that this is part and parcel of the progression of a society.
Yes.
So we have to more align with the moderates of each of these, so that the extremist elements do not gain more strength. Yeah. I think that's important.
So if you take the LGBTQ issue,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Minister Shanmugam, I think, tried to introduce one of the candidates who was LGBTQ. But there was a lot of pushback, I believe, from the Christian community. Pushback was pretty strong.
So we heard. Yeah.
This is all what's in the grapevine and what's been reported. And I think he had to pull back on that move. Is that good or bad?
For me, I think that's not the good move. Because
What's not a good move?
in terms of pulling back because I think we understand that there are differences within the society, and we accept everyone for whatever contributions that each person could make or to the society at large. So regardless whether someone's in LGBT, my personal view, I feel that it's what could the person bring to the table? How could the person contribute to the society at large? And these are the key considerations. Because if we start to go down that route, then are we going down to look at like what we're looking now in terms of racial, religion? Then we keep having to put people into different pigeonholes, which I think, in my personal view, it is not necessarily healthy. I think we should treat the person as he or she comes and to look at the bigger picture.
But for argument's sake, Sani, if you do get elected, you would be coming in on a minority ticket because of the GRC concept. Are you suggesting that we maybe do away with the GRC concept?
Yes,
at some point?
we do. Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the natural consequence.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
Because the moment you start saying that Singapore is not ready for a non-Chinese prime minister, certain races can do this, certain races can't do that. Once you go there and make these qualifiers again and again, there's no end to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to take a chance and say, let's go.
Yeah.
What's your view?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm not a fan of this having my racial group placed in the identity card. I don't, if it ever served a purpose, I think it has long past its due date. This again calls for time in terms of relooking it. And that's why we were talking about the GRC, the minority certificates. I think Singapore has moved on.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that as a society, it has been, when I talk to my friends, this point comes through, that we are overly racialized.
Yeah.
Not racist, but racialized.
Yeah.
In fact, racialization is a more difficult, more insidious thing to deal with than racism. Racism is quite black and white. You can call it out. Someone who uses racial aspersions, that's racism. But racialization, where you look at everything on racial, religious terms, that's a difficult. That's even more insidious and dangerous.
Yeah.
Now, when you came up with the motion, you spoke on the motion about Sika. It was really about workers moving across boundaries, right? And you gave the example in the title of your motion. You gave the example of Sika, which is the FTA with India.
Yes.
Right. Now, you were accused of stirring racial sentiments when you brought that up. Why did you not anticipate that? That if you were to bring up speak on this motion, and if you word the title of the motion with specific reference to one ethnic community, actually it was more a nationality, India, it could lead to you being accused of wantonly racializing the situation or the discussion.
Yeah.
Why didn't you anticipate
like you say
that?
just now, it's actually, you pointed out, although I don't want to begin my argument with that actually, but you pointed out that, it's a nationality issue. It's not a race issue, right? In Singapore, we are always fair to all our races, right? You and I had grown up together.
Yeah.
So we are not particularly talking about a race, and the foreign talent debate that we have done many years ago, it was really a national issue, right? We were genuinely concerned about the job security of Singaporeans. Even very recently, when the manpower minister mocked me in Parliament, it was still the same issue. We were trying to get to the bottom of the issue, whether after you bring in all the foreign PMETs, are our Singaporeans being displaced unfairly? And we can only see that if the government release the breakdown numbers. But the government over the years have keep avoiding, quoting all kinds of statistics to prove that this is not happening. But for each statistic that they have pointed out, I could bring up the arguments that these statistics doesn't give the full picture. And I'm an economist. I study economics, right? And I know economic statistics very well. Right? So for every statistic they brought up, I could give a counter argument why the statistic is not accurate.
Yeah.
Right. So, but nevertheless, the government had over the years not given the data. So we are trying to get to the bottom of the thing. Right? So, and when we brought up the issue and we debated in Parliament, we didn't think that we should be too concerned about the racist element. We know that the government may use that as a label against us, or specifically against me, but I actually have been holding the hope that Singaporeans will understand what I'm doing.
Do you think Singaporeans did?
I think, of course, the jury is still out, but I don't think the issue is so much against me. Yeah? Because I think Singaporeans understand. Okay, let me explain a little bit more. When we were debating the issue, what we are trying to say is that there are certain nationalities that have actually occupied a disproportionate amount of jobs in our market. So if it is the Filipinos, for example, in recent days, I've heard people complaining about Filipinos, Indonesians, Vietnamese. The latest is they're coming in and taking up all the jobs.
What jobs?
Maybe some for the Indonesian and the Filipinos, a lot of them are taking up the PMET jobs.
PMET jobs?
PMET jobs. But for the Vietnamese, a lot of them are taking over the lower level jobs that used to be done by the Chinese, the mainland Chinese who came in to be our masu, to be our hairdresser, and all that, or facial, those cosmetics.
But these are anecdotal.
It's not anecdotal. I think you look at the statistic, there are lots of all these.
How do you get hold of these statistics?
I think there are statistics on that, yeah. Although I didn't, I must say that I didn't check we just look at the statistic from the whole ASEAN statistics and all that, yeah. But there are all these. So when we debated the issue, we thought that if any nationality comes into Singapore and has caused, a disproportionate amount of jobs to be taken up by them, then we should highlight the issue. And at that time, that nationality from South Asia, which the government like to say, took up a disproportionate amount of our IT jobs, our finance jobs, and all that. So we thought we should bring that out. And we also don't like the approach taken up by the government. That why would you want to use words like that South Asian nationality and things like that? I think we shouldn't avoid all these things. We should be direct about it. But I think our society is mature enough, and we are an international society.
I guess if I was to think about the government's point of view, it's always a balancing act, right? Because they have to look at the regional politics, geopolitics. They have to look at balancing our other relations with India or that South Asian country you're talking about. Because there's a lot of, For example, security, military collaborations going on even as we speak. So sometimes when you're a government, I guess you'll have to look at multiple factors at play, and therefore erring a lot more on the side of caution.
That's why in the debate we use the word rebalancing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You see, we understand the government would have all these considerations, right? But that doesn't mean that all these overshadow the interest of Singaporeans. Right? Of course, I couldn't prove completely because the data is not there.
Right.
The Singaporeans are really being displaced from the market. We estimated, it would be in the region of 100,000 and all that, but it is an estimate from us. Okay.
But there is that risk of, even though the fact of the matter is you don't have access to that information, the correct information.
But we can calculate those numbers indirectly from statistics.
You can.
Yeah.
But were you able to prove it?
Yeah, from the statistics. Yeah, we have raised that in our motion.
Yes.
Yeah.
But how was it received?
The government avoided it.
Yeah.
Avoided answer. So I keep asking. That's why that particular question was asked over the last 5 years. Yeah.
So we were coming to an end of the interview.
But of course, when we talk about foreigners displacing Singaporeans, it is not restricted to the SECA.
No,
not
it's
restricted.
not.
It's the whole thing. Yeah. So, but we also know that at that particular point, a particular nationality did surface very significantly in the whole thing.
Now, you have people who respect you tremendously. And I think a significant number of people in this anecdotal who respect you for standing up again and again and again, even if you're admonished, if you're put down, you still stand up and do it, and ask those questions. You got a thick skin, definitely. Anyone otherwise won't be able to manage that.
I don't have a thick skin.
No.
But I have a tenacity.
You have tenacity.
That I must get to the truth.
Yeah.
Now, I have a responsibility to Singapore.
I agree. And that's why people respect you for that, right? Name me 3 lessons you've learned in your term as an MP, NCMP. Three important lessons you have learned. Lessons you've learned not about being a good human being, not about being an effective human being, but about being effective in Parliament. 3 lessons. What are they?
I think one lesson is that maybe I should not have taken up so many issues. Concentrate on a few. But the thing is that every month in Parliament, Parliament sits every month, right?
Yeah.
Every month there's one big issue that emerged, or maybe every other month. So, and if other MPs are not taking it up, I feel a responsibility that I should take it up.
But that's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
There's a line between feeling responsible at a personal level,
how much you can do,
and also being tactical about how you function and operate in Parliament. They're not always in sync. I mean, I had a term, as an NMP, and I learned that lesson as well. Pick your battles.
Yeah.
Choose your battles. And when you go in head on,
Okay. But the current state of our Parliament, you wouldn't be able to win any battle. Even you choose your battle.
Yeah.
Right? So why don't you look at it that is part of my strategy? That I hit everything.
So you increase your chance of
winning.
And
portfolio
approach.
And people will understand that there are so many problems not being surfaced in Parliament
I understand.
before. Okay?
But you brought up the lesson. So
there's
a certain
lesson,
awareness.
There's a certain awareness.
Awareness, right?
But still,
so how if you go in again,
yeah.
you'll have to think about that. What are the other 2?
The other 2 is I should have given more respect to debate.
Meaning?
Meaning, throughout my life and my education, I've concentrated on data. I think that's why, Viswa, in school, I never pay attention to debating and all that.
Yes.
Yeah? I always say, hey, Viswa, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing this and that. I say, why you do all that? Concentrate on your mathematics and statistics, right? I say, So because to me, as long as those data and facts are on the table, there should be little debate. It is only about philosophy. You disagree, you look at the facts differently, but the facts are the same.
Yeah.
Okay, the problem with our parliament today is that the facts are not on the table. Right?
No, but my question is not what's wrong with the parliament. My question is, what's your lesson?
So I say my lesson is, although I'm not completely just like my first point, I think that if you ask me what I've learned, what could I have done better, I say, maybe first point is I should have chosen my battles a bit more. Second point, maybe I should respect the debate a bit more. Think of how the debate will come rather than just stating the facts. Yeah. Right? And then they'll whack me on the facts, or they avoided the debate completely and make me look like, hanging in the air. And all that.
There is an art of persuasion.
Yeah, correct.
Which is not completely about facts and figures and numbers. There's an art of persuasion.
Yes.
And that also talks about, the end of the day, you have to know when to pull your punch and when to throw it.
Yes.
It's part of that art of persuasion. What's your third?
My third point probably would be I should have been a bit more daring, actually. Some of the issues I brought up, I stopped my debate at some point. Of course, very often it will stop in one way or another. Right? But actually, I also voluntarily stopped at a certain point because I just found that I can't be the only one in Parliament pushing this. So I stopped because I'm not an elected MP. Although people will say, no, you shouldn't say that, but I still think that, the mandate of the people is not behind me. Although I have 48.3%, but I don't have the 51%.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward actually very much that if the mandate of the people is behind me, I will be even more, I will pursue a little bit more. Yeah. Just like during the black and white bungalow debate, actually one MP brought up a very good point to the minister and say, how much did you rent out your good class bungalow? And how much did you rent out your good class? And that was when Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean stood up and say to the effect that this is not part of the ministerial statement today. I thought that was not right. But I look around me, nobody stood up. But I respected that MP who had raised the issue. But I say, I don't pursue further.
Right.
But if I'm an elected MP, I will stood up. I say, SM Teo, excuse me, this should be part of the discussion today.
Got it.
Yeah.
So to wrap, Sani, one final point you'd like to make. Make it strong and punchy.
The fact that I've put myself forward for the elections, it's another level in terms of elevating the community service that I've been doing. I've been very much involved in grassroots since my return, but I've decided to elevate it to this particular step now because I felt the need, the calling within me to do more. I was grateful and privileged for the opportunity of meeting residents via the grassroots work, but I want to do more in terms of helping constituents and play a part to transform their lives with the issues that they face. So I hope that I may be given the opportunity this time to be elected and to serve the community.
Thank you. Mun Wai, you have the last word.
I've enjoyed my political journey in the last few years tremendously. One, because I was able to interact with a lot of Singaporeans from all walks of life. And now I have a better idea of what our society is like than before. There's a tremendous learning experience. And many people have asked me, how did you manage to handle all these setbacks? And I say, I don't call them setbacks. I was just trying to do my duty, and if I'm being hammered, so be it. Inside me, I've done the duty. So even I get whacked on the head, I don't care, right? So, and so thousands of Singaporeans, like I've said in my rally speech yesterday, actually stood forward, stepped up and encouraged me and all that. And that is a very strong backing. And I have no problem. I really enjoyed the journey. So now is we leave it to the voters, the Singaporeans, to decide whether PSP is a party that they think deserve to be in Parliament, so that we can continue what we've been doing the last few years in Parliament, and so that the values of Dr. Tan Cheng Bock in terms of compassion, people-centric, everything is about for country, for people, should come into Parliament. Okay, so everything, we only have one more. We are single-mindedly focused on getting to Parliament this election. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And on my part, I'd like to say a big thank you to both of you.
Thank you,
both
Viswa.
of you, for stepping forward when you didn't need to. And I respect you for what you're doing, regardless of what the outcome is.
Yeah, we have choices.
We have choices.
Yeah, but this is a choice we make.
Absolutely.
And we don't regret the choice, right?
Absolutely.
All the way.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.